We are members of the Galway Common of the National Party, and we're here today near Galway City and right on the shores of Galway Bay. We have come to the start of another new year, 2024, and it's obvious that we're at a crucial point in the long history of our ancient homeland. Over the past quarter of a century or so, a succession of traitor governments have ruthlessly implemented a plantation policy involving wave after wave after wave of foreign nationals flooding into our small island home with the obvious intention of making the genuine Irish, the genuine ethnic Irish, a minority in our own home. By doing this, the governments are complying with the global open borders agenda of the sinister, corrupt EU dictatorship. The fact that a huge number of Irish people have found this open borders policy to be a disastrous one and have suffered accordingly, this has not deterred the traitor governments, of which the present one is probably the worst. The many disastrous consequences for Irish people that I'm referring to includes the loss of Irish lives in horrific circumstances at the hands of foreign nationals, brutal attacks with knives and machetes, and of course you have the devastating impact on the families, relatives and communities of the victims. Still, the deluge of foreigners arriving here continues, mostly unvetted and many without passports or documentations, deliberately destroyed en route. Time and again, small, peaceful, law-abiding Irish communities have had large numbers of unvetted, unknown foreigners dumped on them without consultation and often under the cover of darkness. Badly needed nursing homes have been emptied of vulnerable, sick, elderly Irish people to make room for the foreigners. Now, it's easy to accuse a government or political establishment of being bought off or selling out, but something has happened recently in this country, in recent weeks in fact, that has provided clear proof and evidence that this is the case in this country. In November, a teacher and 3 tiny, helpless, innocent schoolgirls were brutally attacked and stabbed by a foreign national in Dublin. This country has unfortunately witnessed a great deal of shocking murders and attacks over the past few decades, but this happened to be one of the very worst. The foreign attacker had lived off the state, i.e. the Irish taxpayer, for 20 odd years without ever having worked or contributed to Irish society. Predictably, a wave of rage and revulsion swept through the country, and horror was expressed from every quarter. Some people whose families and communities had suffered too much and endured too much as a result of the open borders policy were simply pushed beyond the limit of verbal protest and acted accordingly. And who could blame them? For a week or so at most, this shocking attack continued to attract media coverage. After the first few days, most politicians focused on the fear that their great bogeyman, the far right, would somehow profit from or exploit this savage attack. On that point, incidentally, mainstream politicians, notably the justice ministers, have great difficulty about who exactly they mean by the far right. But I suppose we shouldn't be surprised, because then again those same politicians have a great deal of difficulty in explaining quite a lot of things nowadays. Anyways, thankfully after the attack, getting back to the attack, thankfully after a few days the teacher and 2 of the 3 little girls were declared out of danger. But of course they will suffer long-term trauma for a long, long time to come. But at least 3 weeks after the attack, the third child was still fighting for her life, and for all we know may still be doing so. I say for all we know because apart from a brief week or so in the immediate aftermath of the attack, the silence from Irish politicians and media establishments regarding all 4 victims has been deafening. Politicians and political commentators and media figures generally have been working themselves into a frenzy about Gaza, the Ukraine, refugees having to sleep in tents, and of course the dangers of the far right. Yet we have a totally innocent little Irish child daily fighting for her very life and being totally ignored and forgotten by both politicians and media. Now, can you imagine for a moment what the same sources, how they would react if the victim had been a migrant child? We would be bombarded morning, noon and night for months on end with condemnations, expressions of outrage, expressions of grief and heartbreak, and expressions of solidarity, and no doubt vigils will be held all over the place. This would be done by the politicians and the media's establishments. Also, you'd have an outcry from spokespersons for the 33,000 government-funded NGOs and immigrant welfare groups. There would be endless demands from the same sources for more oppressive measures against the far right. No doubt some of those people that I've referred to would tell us that there is no place in Irish society for the far right. But those same people would never tell us that there is no place in Irish society for barbaric, murdering foreigners. Now, as I said, we would have months on end of all that if the victim was a migrant child. But when the victim is Irish, what do we get? A silence that's deafening as the unfortunate child struggles for her life. I would particularly like to know, where are the female politicians in the midst of this great silence, including the women leaders of 3 Dáil parties? There are certain women politicians who are forever making shrill, strident demands for gender equality, equal opportunity, women's rights, children's rights, gender quota, etc. Yet apart from a brief few days after one of the most shocking attacks on women and children ever to take place in this country, those women politicians are part of the blanket silence maintained by establishment politicians and the media. This silence, which has strong echoes of the mafia code of omerta based on guilt and secrecy, particularly shames the self-appointed female champions of women's and children's rights and exposes them for the cheap, shallow, unprincipled hypocrites that they are. If those 3 women leaders of Dáil parties genuinely gave a damn about Irish women and children and the lives of Irish women and children and their welfare, they would be standing up in the Dáil day after day demanding that the government drop its toxic open borders policy, which has already caused so much harm to Irish people. But that will never happen. Those women party leaders will never make that demand, because those hypocrites will always give precedence to globalism, open borders and political correctness over the lives and welfare of Irish people. This appalling episode clearly demonstrates beyond a shadow of a doubt that as far as Irish political and media establishments are concerned, foreigners come first and Irish a poor second. Now, a favourite tactic of our traitor governments when encountering well-justified oppositions from small communities who don't like being swamped by a tidal wave of unknown, unvetted foreigners, is to demonise, smear and generally intimidate those communities who are the genuine, authentic Irish. This bullying approach worked to some extent for a while. The National Party, who have always resolutely opposed the modern-day plantation, have supported those communities and exposed the treachery that underpins the plantation. It took the general public a while to wake up to their sinister plan, to the sinister plan behind the plantation and the huge danger that accompanies it. But now the Irish have awoken, as is evident by the mass rejection of the government policy of dumping huge numbers of foreigners in practically every corner of the country. Entering 2024, the message goes out loud and clear from every corner of the country. Irish communities have every right to defend themselves. We have a right to defend our families, our safety, our homes, our property, our way of life, and above all, we have the right to defend our ancient homeland, Ireland. It's 2024, the tide has turned. The Irish people will win, yes or aye.